It's time for Drummer Nation. My guest is Terry O'Mahony. After establishing himself in the Los Angeles music scene, Terry accepted a teaching position in the Jazz Studies program at the prestigious St Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia, Canada. While there, he authored 3 drum set instruction books and worked with many notable Canadian and American jazz musicians. Upon his retirement, he relocated to Louisville, Kentucky, where he continues to teach and perform. On a personal note, Terry and I have been friends for more than 30 years and have more than a few stories to tell on one another. My guest, Terry O'Mahony, after this. The former Crescent Vanguard series are now widely available as part of the legendary Sabian HH models. HH cymbals are traditionally hand-hammered into shape and sound by Sabian craftsmen. Find out more about the Vanguard series and all other Sabian models at Sabian.com. Sound Synergy's percussion care lubricants and conditioners include a series of 3 products for total drum kit care and maintenance. Percussion care products in your gig bag ensures your entire kit will always look and sound its best. Check out their website at soundsynergies.net.
Hi, this is Stanton Moore. I've been playing and teaching drums for over 30 years. My new site, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, is the perfect online drum learning platform for any level drummer to learn how to play the drums the same way I did. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you as subscribers on the site, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Hi, this is Michael Vosbein, your host for Drummer Nation, and I do the show as labor of love, but I could use a little help. If you'd like to be a patron of the show, please go to the site patreon.com/Drummer Nation. Help us out. Thanks. Well, my guest for this show is my good friend Terry O'Mahony. We go way back and we'll talk all about that. Welcome to the show, Terry. Thanks for doing it.
Hi, Mike. How's it going?
It's going great. You and I go way, way, way back. But before that, let's talk about your origins. Where are you from?
I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and attended the University of Louisville and did a bachelor's degree in classical percussion. And then I was doing a lot of things around town, playing with the orchestra, doing jazz gigs and stuff like that. But I had more questions about the drum set as an instrument and felt like I needed to go to a center where there was somebody that I could study with who really was part of the scene and understood the instrument and could take me to another level. And I was fortunate enough through a strange series of circumstances to meet with the great jazz drummer Jeff Hamilton. So I went out and I moved to Burbank, and he happened to be living in Glendale at the time. So I was able to just jet across the interstate there and catch a lesson. And so I would go see him play, oftentimes with people like Ray Brown and other great musicians. And then I would try to schedule lessons the next day with him, and I would always come armed with a lot of questions about, like, well, during this tune you did this, or why do you do that, and that kind of stuff. And he was always fabulous about being able to articulate why he did things and what he did, and we broke it down, and it was a really wonderful way to study because it was a very personalized course of study, and his influence on me is just completely amazing. And even my wife says that I look like him when I play, so it's probably stuff that seeped in all the way into the DNA. As you recall, Jeff, as a part of his teaching regimen, he would gather together a bunch of his drummers and have a class at his house. We'd all chip in, what was it, $25 maybe, or 20?
Whatever we were paying for a lesson, we would pay Jeff, and he would use that money to bring in a piano player and a bass player, and then sometimes their students too, and we would all play. But typically the bass player was none other than John Clayton. And we went through several piano players through that, but we'll get to that in a minute. But the group settings were very cool because he was giving something back. I don't think Jeff got any money out of that. He turned his house over, and thank you to his wife Joni for allowing that, to pretty much a blowing session for 10 to 15 people sometimes. Right,
and it was great because for me it was great to play with all the musicians that he brought in, and as well from a career standpoint, it was great to meet some of the other drummers because there were some people like you who were kind enough to include me on their sub list, so I would be able to do some work and that sort of stuff in LA, which was great.
And vice versa. We all ended up subbing for one another. We met other bass players. We met other piano players. It was just a great hang, and you knew anybody that you met through Hammer was going to be a quality person. And
He doesn't suffer fools lightly.
Oh, no.
Sound Synergy's Percussion Care lubricants and conditioners include a series of 3 products for total drum kit care and maintenance. Pedal Lube, the only product specifically designed for bass drum, hi-hat pedals, and triggers, as well as all moving metal parts and drum hardware, safely removes grit, grime, and other contaminants while protecting against harmful friction wear. Cymbal Care restores and conditions cymbal surfaces without strippers or harmful polishes. Wear Barrier is a conditioning formula for all drum heads, rims, and even sticks. Percussion Care products in your gig bag ensures your entire kit will always look and sound its best.
So where did we actually meet? Was it at his house?
I think it was at his house because he had a habit of, at that point, I don't think he had injured his elbow. And he liked to play. He liked to play basketball, and there was a basketball court up the street. And so, if you had a lesson with him, it would go like, if I had a lesson at 10, or if I had a lesson at noon, he'd say, "Come around 11." And if you had a lesson at 10, you'd go from 10 to 11. Then we'd go play basketball. Then we'd come back, and I'd have my lesson at 12. So he would sandwich in a round of one-on-one or a horse or something. Between lessons and stuff. So that was always fun. That was another great way to meet other musicians or other drummers.
It was.
During my time.
He put us all together, and we would sometimes you'd get so wasted playing basketball out in the heat that you wouldn't have a lesson that day. You'd have to come back the next day.
Yeah, but that was okay too because it was getting a chance to hang with him and
no
hear some of his great stories. And I wouldn't trade any of that time for anything in the world.
Me neither. Now, I do have to ask you, we have a few funny stories on each other, but one I want to point out on you is why did you sit up straight at your lessons, man? Tell us about that.
Well, this is a favorite story of Jeff on me. And Jeff was always stressing, that when you play the drums, you should sit up straight and your posture was very important.
Breathing,
oftentimes I would come into the lessons and I would be leaning over. And, he kind of pulled my shoulder back and say, sit up straight. And finally, he asked me one day, he said, you're not sitting up straight as a matter of course. So let me ask you a question. Where do you practice? And I said, well, I was new to LA and I hadn't found a place to practice yet, but I had a large, I think it was a 1978 Chevrolet panel van. And so it was, I would put my drums in the panel van and set them up and drive over to the Griffith Park Observatory and play drums. And when it got too hot, I would open the doors and to find, a bunch of people walking around the van looking and going, oh, we wondered what was going on in there. But the roof wasn't really high enough for me to sit completely straight up. So I had to sit like this.
I love that story.
I went to my lesson, I was used to playing like this. So when I told Jeff that, I thought he was going to die. He almost fell on the floor.
It still kills me.
And he likes to tell that story whenever.
He loves to tell it. He said I would tell him to sit up.
It's great.
Yeah,
Hilarious.
I would tell him to sit up, and he would sit up and play great and look great. And then he'd come back again, all hunched over. It was the van.
Yeah, he couldn't figure out why his lesson on posture wasn't taking. Because I couldn't.
Got me tearing up. I'm laughing so much. Well, whatever you're doing was working because you played your ass off and you still do. But the other thing is at some point there was a possibility for you to work at a university in Canada, which you ended up getting the gig, but they needed an audition tape. And none of us had anything like that back then, and it was everybody had a home studio thing. So what'd you do?
Well, again, that whole thing came about because of Jeff. Jeff used to go out and sub on various bands, and he was subbing on Woody Herman's band a few times, and he met a trombone player who subsequently moved to Canada and was teaching at a university up there. And their drummer left, and they needed somebody to begin teaching in the fall. And this was I believe, the beginning of July. So he called Jeff and asked Jeff if he knew anybody. And I think Jeff recommended me because I was one of his only students at that point that had a complete undergrad degree.
Well, that was only one reason.
Yeah, well, anyway, so I talked to the guy. He calls me, and I talked to him, and he said, well, we're going to need a resume and a tape. And I said, okay, well, let me work on that. So I told Jeff, and Jeff said, well, let's put together a tape. We'll do it kind of like the master classes that we did at the house. He says, this will date it. He says, I have a Tascam 4-track that we can set up in my living room, and I'll get you a bass player and piano player, and we'll put together a few trio tunes, and you can send that off. I said, okay, great. So the day comes, I think it's a Saturday, and so I go over to Jeff's house, and he's got his drums set up in his living room there with the piano, and I meet the bass player, who's the great Luther Hughes, a fixture on the LA jazz scene. And hi, Mr. Hughes, nice to meet you. Blah 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 blah. And so I'm setting up the drums, and we're talking about tunes that we're going to do or could possibly do, and that sort of thing. And then knock on the door, and this blonde woman comes in, and Terry, Jeff says, Terry, this is your piano player, Diana. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So we figured a couple of tunes we were going to do, got some arrangements, and ran down the tunes, got a tape, great. And so I gave each of the other musicians their check. So here's $50 for Luther and $50 for Diana Krall. So I don't think she works for $50 a session anymore. I'm not sure.
I don't think she answers the phone for $50.
She doesn't. Nothing for $50. And I've seen her a couple of times since then with Jeff, and we always have a laugh about that sort of thing.
That was a great time, and we all became friends with her and all the other people, and I still keep up with them, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you see them, or you call them, or you run into them at conventions and that sort of stuff. So it's great. I wouldn't trade that time in my life for anything.
Me neither. And then you ended up getting the gig at St Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, which at the time, I believe, maybe still is Canada's leading jazz studies program.
Well, it was at that point, it was the only one in Canada that had a full-time jazz studies program and jazz faculty. And so I went up there, and I went up with the original idea. I said, well, I'll just stay here and then come back to LA or whatever. But I could see that it had the potential, at least for me anyway, of turning into a pretty good situation and a good base of operations. And so I ended up being there for like 29 years. So I just recently retired.
I think what our cymbals brought to the Sabian family is that there is lots more hand hammering. They're all hand hammered, and so you really have to perfect the hammering technique and where to hammer on the cymbal. You don't want to get the cymbal too thin in a lot of places. They were willing to try it, and I think we came out with a great product that is a great musical instrument.
So many times when you teach at a university, they expect you to publish, and I presume you began doing so.
Right, exactly. During the time I was there, I wrote and published a bunch of percussion ensemble music, and ended up writing 3 books: Motific Drum Set Soloing, Jazz Drumming Transitions, and 100 Essential Drum Set Lessons for the Hal Leonard Corporation. And they were all great exercises for me because it made me articulate and really line out, how to approach some of the different things that I was talking about in the book. How to use motivic development for drum solos, which actually is something that was stuff that Jeff did all the time. And my second book, Jazz Drumming Transitions, was a book that was based out of my teaching. When students would come in to me and they would say, "Hey, I'm taking the jazz comp class, and I'm playing other people's charts, and they have me going from a mambo to a swing, or they have me going from an Afro-Cuban 6/8, to swing or whatever, and I don't know how to do that." And so I said, "Well, there really isn't any material to do that. I can explain how to do it and how you want to think about it. I can play it for you, but there really wasn't anything I could put on and say, okay, if you play with this track, this will allow you to practice that." So that became my second book. Third book, Hal Leonard contacted me and said, "Hey, we just made a whole lot of money with this series with this book called 100 Essential Guitar Lessons, and we're going to think about doing one for drums. Would you like to, contribute?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, sure." And then they called me back and they said, "Yeah, well, we're thinking we maybe want you to split the book with somebody else." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm fine to do that." And then they finally called me back and said, "Yeah, he doesn't really want to do it. So do you want to do the book?" And I went, "Yeah, well, okay." So I sat down and wrote out 100
Lesson
topics.
1, sit up straight.
And then, lesson 1, go practice in your van. 100 drum set lessons and ideas and concepts that if you were a drummer and you wanted to explore a whole broad range of topics like jazz, rock, funk, linear drumming, soloing, brushes, all kinds of stuff. Put that together, made the accompanying CD tapes. I think now they're just downloads, and sent that off to them. And that was published a few years ago. So they were 3 great adventures in teaching that mostly sprung from my teaching experience and things that I found that students needed to have, but there wasn't a resource for them to be able to access.
The books are wonderful. And prior to that, if you will recall, you took a year off to finish your master's degree, and I went up there and kept the chair warm for a year. And the best thing about it was your pedagogy was spot on. You had already implemented a lot of these things. And so I literally just walked into your office, and for every course I taught, I had your lecture notes, I had your syllabus. It was very well-defined pedagogy. So thank you for the gig, by the way, and you were a wonderful teacher. No
problem. Thank you for
it was great. It was a great experience. Again, I wouldn't trade that for the world.
My new site, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, is the perfect online drum learning platform for any level drummer to learn how to play the drums the same way I did, with the advantage of having me road test the material on hundreds of stages, countless clinics, lessons, and master classes, and dozens of studio sessions every year. On the site, you'll find over 13 hours of video, dozens of written lessons, and fresh material gets added all the time. I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you as subscribers on the site, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
Now, so you're out now, right? You retired from that job and you're back in the States.
Right, yeah, I moved back to my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. I got married about 6 years ago, and for the last 12 years, my wife and I have been, traveling back and forth, commuting. We've had a commuting relationship. So long-distance relationships work if you really want to, but you have to spend a fair amount of money. And I figure I was about 8% of United Airlines' bottom line for a few years there, but it was worth it because she's a great person. And so now I'm back in Louisville. I'm kind of doing some of the same things that I did before I left, playing some things with the orchestra from an orchestral percussionist standpoint, and other jazz-related gigs. I'm teaching at a university here, Bellarmine University, and just having a great time with life.
Now, along the way, of course, you've maintained your career as a professional drummer, jazz drummer. Who are some of the people you've worked with?
Mm-hmm. A lot of the people that I've worked with over the years were folks that we had brought into the university, people like Mike Stern, Randy Brecker, Larry Grenadier, let's see, who else? John, not John Schofield, but the other jazz guitar player, John, recently died.
John
Abercrombie.
Yes.
He was great. There's another great Canadian jazz pianist in the style of Oscar Peterson. His name's Oliver Jones. Worked with him a bit. And let's see.
Well, that's cool. We don't have to go through all of them. The point being is you don't take off your gigging hat to be a teacher, especially at that level.
No, that was one of the things that appealed to me about this particular teaching job, was that part and parcel of it was you keeping your playing chops up and not just vegetating. And so when these people came in, you had to have the horsepower to back them up. And one of the nicest compliments we as a faculty ever got was when Randy Brecker showed up a few years ago, and he said, "Yeah, man, it's great to come to a place and play with a faculty group." He says, "where I don't have to play with the band in my mind, I can play with the band on stage."
Well said, and what a compliment.
And Mike Stern was great too. He came in and we played one tune, and I could tell he was just checking me and the bass player out. And he finally said, "Yeah, okay, so everything would be fine." He says, so we played a couple of tunes, and we really didn't rehearse. We just kind of talked and had a coffee, and then we went out and shredded it on the concert.
That's
so
great.
That was a lot of fun.
I have to ask, one of the things I like to ask all the educators I talk to on this program, which I consider to be something of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is, with the industry changing as dramatically as it has, how do you best prepare these kids for being able to work once they get out of school?
Well, it's been my experience that the more I could do, the more I could do. And what I mean by that is that I wanted to be able to say yes whenever anybody called on the phone. For example, if somebody called and said, "Hey, I got this big band gig. Can you do it?" Yes. "Hey, I got this jazz trio gig. Can you do it?" Yes. "Hey, I need somebody to play a show." Yes, I can do that. Do you play mallets? Yes. You play timpani? Yes. Do you play timbales? Yes. Do you play hand percussion? Yes. Do you play ethnic percussion? Yes. And part of that means having invested in yourself to not only learn the stuff, but also have the instruments to be able to use and go play it at any particular time. It also makes your musical life a little richer, because if you have experiences with Brazilian and Afro-Cuban music, it makes your jazz playing better and vice versa. I wouldn't say that I was a great student in school, but I certainly knew how to write a paper, and being able to write a paper meant that I was able to write a book, and through that I could impart my knowledge on the drums in a book, about music. So if you have some writing skills, that shows up as well. So the more areas of your own musical education that you can develop, the broader your potential for employment is. Like, for example, this month alone, I played a ballet, I played a bunch of jazz gigs, I played a couple of orchestra dates, I played a church gig, and what else? And I've been teaching. So during the course of a month, I may do 4 or 5 different things. But for me, I like it because it's they all have different. They all tap different aspects of my knowledge and my.
I think that's great advice to young players. If you get with a band and they hit it big, and that's something you do the rest of your life, all the better. But chances are we have to come through a lot of different things. A mutual friend of ours, Daniel Glass, was doing a clinic I was at, and he asked the audience, mostly drummers, of course, how many of you are professionals? And maybe 70% raised their hands. How many of you guys who are pros have done country gigs? Most of them. How many have done R&B gigs? Most of them. How many of you have done big bands? Most of them. Any style you wanted to name. How many have played a circus? There's all kinds of stuff that goes in the musical basket. I played a rodeo once. So, I look at all those things as going into your musical basket, and as many things as you could put in there, the better off you are. And so that's great advice to young players. So what's coming up next for you, Terry?
Kind of more of the same. I'm just I'm planning on doing some concerts, some jazz-oriented concerts here. I've also been asked by a former colleague to play in his Brazilian band with a couple of Brazilian expatriates, which is great for me because their take on Brazilian music, obviously, is different than the feel and the take that we North Americans have. So that's fun. I'm also going to do some more orchestral stuff and some more teaching until May.
Then you're off for the summer.
Off for the summer, yeah.
We'll have to come up to Atlanta and see us, or down to Atlanta and see us.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Well, I appreciate your time for the interview, Terry. It's not a long format, so that leaves me with most people saying, will you come back and do another one?
Absolutely. Anytime you want. Let me know.
All right, man. Keep the faith up there, straight ahead and strive for tone, and we'll talk soon. I'll see you at the next convention or something.
All right. Take care, Mike. Thanks.
Thank you, Terry.
This is your host, Michael Vospine, and I'd like to thank our friends at Sabian Cymbals, Sound Synergies, Stanton Moore Drum Academy, and Classic Drummer Magazine. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.